want to learn how to wholesale real estate and flip houses? Join Lex Levinrad on the Investing in Real Estate show and learn how you can get started in investing in real estate today. Lex has flipped over 1,000 houses, and he's ready to teach you the steps that you need to take to move one step closer toward achieving your goal of financial freedom. And now for today's show.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Investing in Real Estate show. This is your host Lex Levinrad, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about what's working and what's not working in today's market. And this is applicable regardless if you're a brand new investor and you've never purchased a property, or if you're a seasoned investor who's got tons of fix and flips and rentals. Either way, paying attention to the details is important in today's market. And I've got a background on this because I've been investing since 2003, so I'm in my 23rd year of buying and flipping houses. I've done 4,500 transactions collectively with my students in our partnership program, 1,500 houses myself independently, and I've had the pleasure, the good fortune, or lack of good fortune, to have purchased prior to the financial crisis of 2008. Because I started in 2003, and it also had the fortune or misfortune to go through 2009 and 10 and 11. And, you know, when I started out as an investor in 2003, I was a newbie, probably like a lot of you listening to this right now. And I'd, been on a couple of webinars, been to some boot camps and downloaded some home study courses. And I wanted to get into real estate. I wanted to be wealthy, right? Prior to that, I was in stocks. And that worked out great for a few years, and I made a lot of money. I made a lot of money in commissions, but the stock market crash of 2000 made me really think like, wait, do I really want to do this for the rest of my life? Do I really want to be dependent on an external factor? And it was around that time that I actually saw a late night infomercial by a guy named Colton Sheets, and he was talking about how you could buy real estate with no money down, which was very appealing because I just lost my stock brokerage business and I was pretty much unemployed. And I was trying to figure out my next move. And I bought that infomercial course, got shipped to me. I read through it. It sounded interesting. And one thing that I noticed is he's located in Florida. He lived in Stuart, Florida, and he was talking about how you could buy 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom homes for $45,000. And at the time, I'm living in Los Angeles, and houses are $450,000, $500,000. And I'm thinking, you know what? If I wanted to buy a rental property, I could see how buying something for 45,000 would be feasible, and being able to find somebody who would lend me 45,000 would be feasible. But getting somebody to loan me $500,000, not so feasible. And I spoke about that with my wife, and we discussed moving to Florida. We discussed new beginnings, getting out of stocks, getting into a new career, making a change of pace. And we discussed the fact that there were no income taxes and how in California it was 11% at the time. And we started eyeing Florida. I'm thinking, hey, maybe we should move out there. And I started thinking, I'm going to come to Florida and I'm going to pick up rental properties, right? So regardless of where you are in the United States, if you're listening to this podcast today, I'm going to tell you this, right? There's landlord-friendly states and there's not landlord-friendly states. So if you live in a landlord-friendly state, fantastic. But if you don't, you should consider investing in another state that is landlord-friendly. All right, so we made our move to Florida. I got started buying rental properties. At the time, the goal was I was going to focus on building our net worth and our future and our financial freedom plan, meaning we were going to buy 10 rental properties and retire. That was the plan when I started. It sounds very naive. It was naive, but that was the plan. Along the way, when I got to 10 properties, then the goal became 20, then it became 50, then it became 100. And after that, the goal changed to where I said, if I want to get to 1,000 doors, I got to go into multifamily. I started looking externally. I remember one time I sent a guy who was working with me as a partner out to Memphis to look at like a 210 unit building. And he came back and said, it was a little too rough for us to deal with. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to stick to my roots. I'm going to stick to what I know. I'm good at single family homes. This is what I understand. I understand how to buy houses from people, that are in foreclosure or delinquent on their property taxes or have some kind of damage, maybe from a hurricane. Right? Keep in mind that when I got started in 2003, the following year, so my first year was like an apprenticeship, essentially working under my mentor Ben and his partner Alan, just like learning the business. Like, why would somebody sell their house for 100,000 if it's worth 200,000? That makes no sense. Or why would someone borrow money at 12%? That makes no sense if you can go to the bank. So I didn't understand all these things, right? And if you're listening to this, you may not understand those things either. But once I got past that apprenticeship and I learned how to actually locate deals for Ben and get paid a finder's fee, what we call in this industry being a bird dog, then I started realizing like, wow, like there's people out there every single day that are, going into foreclosure today, nowadays. I just saw something yesterday, 40,000 new foreclosure filings hit in the last 30 days. So we're ramping up foreclosures big time, right? In fact, I've got a foreclosures, short sales, and bank home properties boot camp coming up this weekend on February 20th to February 22nd. Um, so basically, foreclosures ramping up back then. Foreclosures ramped up as well in 2007. I started in 2003, so one of the things that we had happen was a significant event was we had a very high level hurricane that hit St. Lucie County, which is about an hour north of where I live. And that was how I got my start. That's how I actually bought my first deal. My first deal I bought to Ben was a seller who owned three houses. So she lived in one house and she had three rental properties. And all of those three rental properties got hit by the hurricane and the roofs got destroyed and there was water and mold in the houses, and the tenants obviously moved out. And now she wanted to sell them. And she found me by a classified ad in the paper that cost me $185 that said, "We buy houses for cash." And she called, and at the time I wasn't buying myself, I was essentially just a deal finder for Ben. And she called, and long story short, we landed up, or I should say, Ben landed up buying the three houses. There was over 100,000 in equity in those three houses, and I got paid a finder's fee of it was supposed to be 5,000 per house, which was 15,000, but he was pretty happy. He gave me an extra two, so I got 17,000. And that was when the concept, the idea changed from just an idea to a reality. Because I think every single new real estate investor out there, including many of you listening to this today, I think you hear these things, you see a webinar or an infomercial or whatever it might be, and you think, wow, that sounds amazing. I'd like to be wealthy. But at the same time, you've got all these like alarms going off in your head, these like red, red flag alarms. Like, is this a scam? Is this real? Can you really do this? Should I trust this person? And that's what I find a lot in our training events, when we do things. I'll give you a perfect example. All right. So at my training boot camps, and especially even more so at my coaching events for my coaching students, I'll often put a house out there. Okay. And I'll be like, hey guys, here's a house. This is what it's worth. This is what you can get it for. So it's worth, I had one at my last event. I said it's worth 125 and you can get it for 85 and I'll give you the loan. Now, you would think that people who are aspiring real estate investors would jump at that, right? They would raise their hand and they would jump right up. And some people do. Like my student Chris, I did this exercise. I had a property out in Okeechobee. I said, you can buy this property for 80,000, put 20 down, and I'll lend you the 60. And he jumped up and said, I'll do it, like without any hesitation. He'd never been to Okeechobee, didn't know what the house looked like. He just said, I'll do it. Interesting that he made $3 million in the last, few years since attending my boot camp. So he's an action taker, not afraid, right? But most people are not like that. Most people are much more analytical, and they suffer from paralysis analysis. So they say, well, I want to make sure I understand how this works. And I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I worked for Ben for the first 6 months, I was doing foreclosure leads. So he'd give me these lists of people that are in foreclosure, and I would have to get in my car and I'd have to drive and knock on the door. And it was crazy. I mean, driving all over Palm Beach County, going from, Boca Raton to Green Acres to Lantana to West Palm Beach. During the day, between 9 to 5, when you knock on the door, guess where most people are? At work, right? So most of the time I didn't get anyone. And if I went early in the morning before they left for school with their kids, then I would not get a very warm reception. If I came in the evening after 6 p.m., or before they're going to have dinner with their family, I wouldn't get a warm reception either. And if I said the word foreclosure within earshot of their kids, they would get anywhere from upset to angry to violent, right? So I did that for 6 months, and I did that for, believe it or not, 8 hours a day for 6 months. So I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't give up easily, and I think that that's one of the traits that's the most important thing to have as a real estate investor, because the average newbie goes to a real estate seminar or boot camp. I see this all the time, right? I got 7,500 people that have been through my training program since 2008, and the average person comes. And it's amazing to watch. They come in on that Friday morning. Registration opens at 8:30, and they're sitting at their desk and they ready to go, right? They and then they go through the presentations and they get gung-ho, and they're drinking the Kool-Aid from both, two cups at the same time, right? This is awesome, this is amazing, I love Lex, I want to do real estate. And then you watch this progression over the Saturday and over the Sunday. But then what happens to that person? Sunday 5 p.m. our boot camp ends, and they go, and most of them are never to be seen again, meaning I see people all the time. Just a week ago, I was in a restaurant. A guy walks up to the table. I'm sitting there with Alyssa, and he says, "Hey, Alex, how's it going?" I said, "Great. How are you?" And he says, "I just wanted to come over. My wife's over there." He points to his wife. He says, "I just wanted to come over and tell you, I came to your boot camp about, 6 years ago, and I just wanted to thank you because I'm on my 13th rental property, and I'm now, worth more than $1 million. And it all started with that event that I came to." And I said, "Oh, wow, that's amazing. And then when he leaves, Alyssa says, "Who's that?" And I said, "I have no idea." I said, I've got 7,500 people that have been to my events. And that's just attending events. What about something like this podcast? How many hundreds of thousands of people have listened to that? This podcast got over 3 million downloads. My YouTube channel, 3 million downloads. So basically, um, the effect is tremendous, right? But the problem is that these people who are drawn into this idea, right? And it's an easy idea to be drawn into, right? It's like there's three principles. I learned this from the guy that did the Ginzu knives infomercial, and it's very, very true. He said, "I won't do an infomercial unless it is one of three things. Number one, teach people how to be thinner. Number two, teach women how to be prettier. And number three, teach people how to make more money." He said, "You want to know why? Because all three of those have universal appeal, meaning however many people there are on the planet, I don't even know, 7 billion, whatever it is, all 7 billion of them would like to lose weight, would like to make more money. And the ones that are the ladies in the segment would also like to be prettier, skinnier, whatever, right? So basically, and I'm sure many guys would also like to be, more handsome or whatever. So those are universal. So I don't give advice on losing weight. Clearly, I'm not a good candidate for that. Um, and I don't give advice on beauty and cosmetics, but I do give advice on learning how to make money and creating financial freedom. And it is something that does have universal appeal across the board. And what I mean by that is it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter what race or religion you are, what ethnicity you are, what language you speak. We all want better. We want better lives for our families. We want a better life for ourselves, for our spouses, for our future. We would all love to take our spouse to Paris for, you know, Christmas or New Year's. We would all love to take our family on a nice vacation paid for without stress and worry and racking up credit card debt. We would all like to live our lives stress free, living in nice houses and driving nice cars and going to nice restaurants and eating um, at good places and having great hobbies and good friends. But the problem and the challenge that we all run into is that that seems like a ideal that's unattainable. And I think the reason for that comes from another book that I read way in the beginning was Rich Dad Poor Dad. And I read that right after that Carlton Sheets infomercial. So I did the Carlton Sheets infomercial, and right after that, I started going to real estate investment club meetings in Los Angeles, and you had some of the older time gurus like Ron LeGrand, Robert Allen, and stuff. I'd go to those, I'd see them speak, and they'd have a course that they were selling at the end, and I'd buy them and I'd read them. And at the time, I was unemployed, but I had credit cards. So I'd use my credit cards to basically invest in my education and to buy as many of these, home study courses and boot camps that I could, just like many students come and sign up for my boot camp. And around that time, I met an individual at one of these real estate investment club meetings and told him my story. He actually felt bad for me. I told him I had the stock brokerage business and I'd lost it, and I had a wife who didn't work, and I had a son who just turned one, and he felt bad for me. He gave me a copy of his Rich Dad, Poor Dad book. And I went home and I read it. And I remember back then I used to smoke. I quit many years ago, but back then I used to smoke. And I sat outside, I had a cappuccino, and I was smoking and reading this book. And then when I got done, I went back out and I opened the book. And my wife came out and she said, "Didn't you just finish that book?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "So what are you doing?" I said, "I'm reading it again." Like, "Are you kidding?" I said, "No." She said, "Why?" I said, "Because it was just, it just completely shifted my mind." I said to her, I got a finance degree, right? I went to San Diego State University, top 20 business school. I've read, I don't know, thousands of books on investing. I was a stockbroker, financial planner, financial advisor. I worked on the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade. I managed $83 million of other people's money. I traded millions of shares literally in and out every single day. I was one of the biggest traders for our firm back in the 97, 98, 99 pre NASDAQ crash. So I thought I knew a thing or two about money and investing, right? I considered myself smart in that area. But then I read an $8 book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is a parable about a guy who's got a real father, who's the superintendent of the school system in Hawaii, and his buddy Mike, who's got a dad who never finished high school and is a multimillionaire from real estate. And I realized that everything that I had learned about money was wrong, and everything that I'd learned about investing was wrong. And the reason it was wrong is very simple. Here I was, married, unemployed, no money, no savings, a wife with no job, and a 1 year old. And I didn't really have anything to account for, meaning everything I'd done, my finance degree, all the money that I'd made. But here I was broke with nothing. And it was a very humbling feeling. But at the same time, I realized what I read in that book, the Rich Dad, Poor Dad book, really, really resonated with me. And I said to myself, you know what? This is so simple. You buy a property, you get a mortgage, you put a tenant in there, their rent covers the mortgage. And then you just sit back and wait. And every year you raise the rent. And those of you listening to this right now know a thing or two about that. If you're a renter, you've seen your rent go up pretty substantially over the last 5 or 10 years, right? So every year that goes by, you just raise your rent. And every year that goes by, your mortgage gets paid down, and then one day, your mortgage is paid off. If you're smart, you do a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage. It happens a lot quicker. So if you're 50 years old and you got a 15-year mortgage, at 65, you own the house free and clear. Generally speaking, prices of houses double in around 12 years. So if you buy a rental property for $200,000 today, it'll double to $400,000 in 12, 13 years. And if the rent is $2,000 today, it'll double to $4,000 in 12 or 15 years, which means you'll have 4,000 a month coming in from that one property for the rest of your life, increasing at about 5% per year for the rent increases, right? We do a 5% rent increase on our leases, no problem in Florida. So basically, if you can do one of those, you could do 10. If you do 10, you got 40,000 a month. And I think many of you listening to this would say, yeah, I'd be pretty good at 40,000 a month coming in, right? So the question is, well, how challenging is it to get to that? And the answer is, this is the weird part. This is the ironic part. It's not challenging at all. It's actually quite easy. It's a lot easier to do it that way than it is to do it by, let's say, investing in index funds in your 401k. I know a thing or two about that, right? Like I said, I've traded stocks, bonds, mutual funds, commodities, options. I don't know a method where you could say, hey, listen, I'm going to show you how to open up a brokerage account with no money. I'm going to show you how to create $1 million in there with no money. Not possible. Walk into the bank and tell the bank manager, hey, listen, I'd like to borrow 100 grand to buy some Facebook stock. I got a good feeling. What are they going to say to you? They're going to say, get out of here. But go into that same bank and say, I'd like to buy a $100,000 house. I'll say, fill out an application. So big difference, right? So it's not that difficult actually to buy a rental property and clean it up, rent it out, have the tenant cover the mortgage, and then hold it till it's free and clear and have all that cash flow for the rest of your life. But that's buying retail. That means, picking up the phone, calling a realtor, saying, "Hi, I see that rental property. I'd like to go take a look at it. Okay, it looks okay. I'm going to apply for a mortgage." There's a couple of problems with that. First problem is they're going to require, typically on investment properties, 25% down. So on a $200,000 property, they're going to want 50 grand. So if you have 50 grand, great. If you don't have 50 grand, how are you going to buy it? So that's challenge number one. Challenge number two, even if you did have 50 grand, now that you bought the one rental, if all you had was 50,000 saved up, how are you going to buy rental two? How are you going to buy rental three? And that's where learning how to buy properties at 50 or 60 cents on the dollar, something I'm teaching this weekend at the Bank Home Properties Bootcamp, comes into play, right? And the way it works is very, very simple, right? And I'm going to use round numbers, all right? So I'm going to use 100,000 number just to explain it, even though in your market houses might be two, three, $400,000, right? So let's say on $100,000, on a $200,000 house, it's worth 200,000. We call that in this business ARV, or after repair value, which is just a fancy term for this is what the house is worth, or this is what it would appraise for, or this is what this type of house is selling for in this neighborhood. Now let's take that house. I want you to envision this perfect house in this neighborhood that goes for 200,000. And now what I want you to do is imagine that next door to this perfect house that's been fixed up and selling on the MLS for 209,000 or 219 is a house where a lady died 2 years ago and it went through probate. She lived in the house for the last 60 years. Nothing's been updated. The kitchen still has that old pink and green tile. I'm not sure why they liked pink and green back then. Maybe all the acid they were doing back in the 60s. I don't know. It's got the old terrazzo flooring. It's got these old jalousie windows. It's got window units, no central air. The house smells cigarette smoke, dogs, and cats. And this specific lady had 11 cats. So there's a urine smell that's in the boards of the house. It's in the drywall. It's a stench of ammonia. Okay. And in addition to that, she was a pack rat and she was a hoarder. And there's boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes of newspapers and all kinds of things. And all those boxes attract cockroaches and rats. And in between walking, looking through the house and all these boxes, you see cockroaches, you see rats everywhere. Now, what I ask you is this. This house is next door to the house listed at 219. Question is, what would that house sell for? All right. Let's say someone like me was going to come along and I was going to look at that house. You'd say, well, how would you find a house like that? I'd say, easy. I go buy a list of inherited and probate properties and I mail a postcard. Or I call them, or send them a text, or go knock on their door. And they get the postcard and they call me and say, hey, my mom died. I'm looking to sell the property. How much could you give me for it? And I say, well, let me come out and take a look. We make an appointment. I go out there and I take a look. They know the house next door is listed for 219. They also know that they obviously are not going to get anywhere close to that with this house because it needs so much work. So when I go to the property, I'm just going to say to them, look, this is a decent neighborhood, middle class kind of neighborhood. Um, and that's funny because if you're in California, 200,000, I think you can buy like a shoebox in the corner of a bathroom. But if you're in, some places in this country, in the Midwest, you can buy a pretty decent house for, two, 300,000. So it all really depends on your neighborhood and your area. So I'm just using round numbers that are generic for my market. And there's plenty of markets where you can buy houses at half that price, and there's plenty of markets where you buy houses at double that price. But in this scenario, we're using a house that's worth 210, 220. I'm going to look at it. And the first thing I'm going to say to this lady is, look, I don't really want to buy this house. And she's going to say, why not? And I'm going to say, well, look, this house, I'm going to spend, I don't know how much money just trashing it out. Then after I've done that, I've got to fumigate it. I've got to bring in pest control. I don't know if that urine smell is going to come out or if I'm going to have to take all the drywall out of this house. If I do that, I'm going to have to take out all the insulation. It may even be in the wiring. And being that this house is from 1967, I'm probably going to have to do the electrical wiring too. While we're at it, your plumbing is cast iron pipes and those rust at 50 years. So we're going to probably have to replace the plumbing for PVC. Then in addition to that, I'm going to have to renovate the entire house, put back the drywall, put in new kitchens, bathrooms, flooring, put in central air, put on a roof. I said, that's probably $100,000. Now, this is the thing. It's not 100,000. It's less than that. How much? Well, average 1,000 square foot house, let's say interior rehab, including appliances, stainless steel, no more than 30 a foot. So that's 30,000. Roof, 10,000. So that's 40,000. Plumbing, maybe I'm redoing it, maybe I'm not. Electrical, maybe I'm redoing it, maybe I'm not. So you could probably do it for 50. What I just said would be 100. But keep in mind that if that same lady were to call a contractor, a general contractor, and say, hey, I want to put on a new roof, I want to remodel this house, what do you think the quote would be? 100, right? We typically do our jobs at about 50% of what a contractor would quote you. Why? Because we have our own crews. We know how much labor and materials cost. So they're not going to think anything's unusual if you say 100. So if your house is worth 200 and it's 100 in work, if I bought it at 100 and spent 100 fixing it up, right? Let's say I paid 100,000 to buy your house or your mom's house that you inherited. And now after I paid you 100,000 to buy it, I'm going to spend another 100,000 fixing it up. Now my cost is 200. Well, at that point in time, if I were to turn around and want to sell the house, would I make any money? Of course not, right? Because if I'm selling a house at 200,000, closing costs 2, 3, 4%, commissions, right? So for the average seller, if you don't have a real estate license, that could be 8, 10%. So 10% on 200 is 20. So I'd net 180, I'd lose $20,000. So if I bought the property at 80, I'd break even. So where would I need to buy the property to make money? Probably, let's say my goal was to make 30 grand. I need to buy it at 50. So when she says, how much can you offer? The first thing I'm going to say is, I don't really want to buy a property. Then I'm going to explain why. And then she's probably going to say something like, well, what could you offer? Now, here's the thing that's important to understand. Some sellers are going to have 10 different postcards that got mailed to them. They're going to meet me and then they're going to meet 9 other people. And I'm probably not going to get the deal. But other sellers may only have my postcard and not be talking to anyone else. Also, some sellers might be more motivated than others. One seller might be like, oh, this is a pain. I just flew in from Seattle. I work for Microsoft. I'm a multimillionaire. I don't want to deal with disposing of mom's house. But another person might be like, wow, my credit cards are maxed. If I could sell this house, I could pay off my credit cards and I could get a fresh start. And everything in between those two scenarios, right? So essentially, long story short, let's say I throw out a number like 50 grand. She says, is that the best you can do? And I say, unfortunately. And she comes back and says, can you do 55? And I say, sure. And sign a contract and buy it at 55. Now, let's say I go and I fix up this house. Let's say it cost me 50. So now I'm at 105. Let's say there were some fees, closing cost points, insurance, etc. So let's say I'm at 115. Okay. And now I go and I advertise it on the market, rents for 2,000 a month in this neighborhood, and I find a tenant and I put that tenant in place. And now I've got a property that's a rental. And let's just say, for argument's sake, that it cost me 110 to get in, all in with the fees. Let's say I borrow that entire 110,000 from a private lender. Just to put into perspective, I've got $27 million worth of private lender money that I could pick up the phone and borrow right now. So I would have no problem picking up the phone and borrowing $110,000 at 8%. In fact, I just borrowed 110,000 at 8% from a lender on a property that I just sold last Friday. All right. So now let's say I borrow that money, I fix up the house, I rent it out. I'm paying the lender like $770, $800 a month, whatever it is. I'm renting it for 2,000. So I'm making cash flow. I've prepaid my insurance the day I bought the house using the lender's money. And I don't have a property tax bill until November, and I've got till next March to pay it. So I'm literally putting, let's say, $1,000 a month into my pocket from day one. Now I go and I say, hey, listen, mortgage broker, I got a great mortgage broker in our training, Jeff. He's done refinances for a lot of our students, probably 20, 30 of our students have done refis with him. And I say, hey, Jeff, listen, I got this property over here, thinking about refinancing, and I'm paying this guy 8%. I want to see, what you can do for me. And he orders up an appraisal, and it's all fixed up, right? New kitchen, new bathroom. So it appraises higher than 200, it appraises at 220. And the bank's willing to lend 75% of that amount because banks require 25% down. And this is the trick that I need you guys to understand. If I bought the house at 220 and it was all fixed up, the bank would require 25% down. But if I buy the house at 50 grand and put in another 50 and borrow 110 from someone, then when I appraise it, the bank lends 75% of appraisal. So there's a little bit of a loophole there, right? That loophole is what allows our industry to exist. In other words, if that loophole was closed, let's say bank said, I'll take this property at 50 grand, I'll fix it up, and then I'll rent it out, then we wouldn't exist as a business. I wouldn't exist as a business. But banks aren't in the business of buying houses and fixing them up. They're in the business of lending money to other people to buy houses. So because of that, the bank looks at it and says, all right, we've got an appraisal from a licensed appraiser, 220,000. So we're willing to lend you 75% of that amount. All right. So they're going to give you whatever that works out to be. What is that? The 110.55. So it's 140, 155, I think, right? I'm not going to do the math. I'm not going to pull out a calculator. So they're going to lend you this amount. Now, keep in mind, I only owe 110. So I'm going to pay off the 110. I'm going to have 40, 50,000 cash left over. Now, how much of my own money did I use to do the deal? Zero, because I borrowed all of the money for the repairs and the purchase from the lender. So now, what's the net result? I've got a property appraised for 220,000. I owe the bank 150. I've got 70,000 of equity in the property, and I put $50,000 in my pocket. So when you buy real estate that way, you can buy unlimited real estate, because as soon as I refinance, that lender gets his 110 back. And then he says, hey, Lex, let me know next time you have a deal. Why? Because he was loving getting those $800 checks every month. And now that I refinance, he's not getting them anymore. He wants to put his money to work because he doesn't want to put that 110 grand in the stock market. He doesn't want to put it in a CD. He wants to get a nice return like that 8%, right? So, and I do 8%, but many new investors start at 12%. If you were one of my students and I was lending you money to do a fix and flip or rental, I'd lend you money at 12% at 3 points, my own personal funds, right? But if I'm the borrower, I've been doing this for 23 years and I've got, hundreds and hundreds of lenders that I know personally, family and friends that, one text, I don't even have to make a phone call. I just shoot a text and I could borrow what I need to on a property. So that strategy that I just kind of went through is dependent on a couple of things. Number one, it's dependent on the ability to buy a property at a substantial discount. In this case, a $200,000 house for 50 grand because it was a messed up probate. It could just as well have been a hurricane damaged house, right? Or a foreclosure. Every single day in America, people die, people get sick, people get disabled, people go into foreclosure, people lose their jobs. It's sad, but it's true and it's real. And when this happens, they need to sell their house. And as I mentioned to you guys, we're going into a new foreclosure crisis, right? So a year and a half ago at the boot camps, when I was telling people, listen, guys, we've peaked already. If you haven't sold, it's going to get a lot harder to sell. People would look at me like I was an alien. Then you started seeing people talk about housing crisis. Now, no one's really talking about the financial crisis yet, except me. But I'm here to tell you that we're going right into one. And foreclosures are spiking, 27% year over year. Bank home properties are up 34% year over year. Just last month, 40,000 properties taken back by the bank. And as this accelerates and as prices come down, there's going to be more and more opportunities to buy. Now, here's the interesting thing about that statement. I cannot even begin to tell you how many people hear that statement and go, oh, well, if prices are going to go down, why would I buy real estate? And that's what I call surface level analysis. And surface level analysis will kill you because the principle is the exact opposite. Would you rather buy a property at 100 and then have it go to 200? Or would you rather buy a property at 200 and have it go to 100? So you'd say, well, obviously, I'd rather buy a property at 100 and go to 200. But then I'll ask you a simple question. When the houses were being given away by the banks back in 2009, why weren't you buying? And when real estate peaked in the pandemic in 2020, 21, 22, why were so many people buying at the peak? Think about that for a second. And the answer is because they were using what we like to call in the investing lingo rear view mirror analysis. In other words, real estate's gone up like crazy. I've got FOMO. I better buy before it goes up even more. That's how people were thinking in 21, 22. Now they're thinking, well, real estate's not doing so well. I had a guy came to my real estate investment club meeting. He said, oh, real estate's not a sure thing. If you had bought a place in Miami 3 years ago, you've lost your down payment. I'm like, exactly. And then that guy left the meeting. In other words, real estate no good. So that's the irony. The irony is as prices come down, more and more and more of you decide that real estate no good. And that's great for me. That's awesome for me because it means less competition, more houses for me to buy. Because at some point when prices go down, guess what happens? They bottom, just like they did in 2009, 2010. That's what allows someone like me to go and buy 9 houses in 1 month for $36,000 that used to sell for $200,000. And that's exactly the same principle that's going to allow me again to go in this crisis and buy houses for 30, 40, 50 cents on the dollar. So that's the first part of this equation, understanding what we call buy, repair, rent, refinance, or the Burr method. Very simple. Buy a house, fix it up, rent it out, go get a mortgage, pay back the lender, and do it again. And like I mentioned, I recommend you do a 15-year mortgage and not a 30-year mortgage. The second principle is that you have to have the ability to buy houses at a discount because you can't employ the strategy if you can't find houses at a discount. And finding houses at a discount, we teach that a lot at our wholesaling boot camp, involves basically reaching out to what we call motivated sellers, people who are in foreclosure, people who are in pre-foreclosure, short sales, bank-owned properties, damaged houses, probates, uh, tax defaults, tax delinquencies, right? Any sort of situation where someone's motivated to sell, right? So those two factors combined, the ability to source deals at a low price by marketing to motivated sellers, or bank-owned properties, or short sales, foreclosures, tax delinquents, etc. And the second is understanding the concept that you could buy a property cheap, fix it up, rent it out, and then you could go to the bank and refinance and pay that lender back. Now, a lot of you listening to this are thinking, well, that sounds great, but how would I find a lender, right? So, what I found in real estate is there's two instant blocks that people have. The first one is they say, well, how would I get a lender? Some people say, well, how would I get people to fix it up? And some people will say, well, I don't have a down payment. So they just have this little switch in the head that turns off, like, yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to do it, but I don't have a down payment. So let's go back to Netflix. And once again, very surface level. So I don't like to look at things on a surface level. I'm a very analytical person. I like to drill deep. When I say drill deep, I mean drill deep, deep, deep. So if you're my coaching student and you said, hey, I want to employ the strategy, I would say, great, let's pick a target market and, a market where you want to focus on. Let's say your goal is to buy 10 rentals. Where are those 10 rentals going to be? What city? What zip code? What subdivision? And then I teach them how to drill down and learn that market really, really well, right? And factor out all of the noise, right? So a lot of beginning investors will stumble across wholesale deals from a wholesaler, or they'll see them on Facebook groups. Because when people are attracted to getting into real estate, unfortunately, what happens is they're going to go and join a lot of these groups and then they're going to get taken advantage of, right? So there's so many ways as a newbie you can get taken advantage of. I'll just give you a couple. So one is someone will post in a group, I've got private lender money at 5%, um, no fees, something like that, right? It's actually against Facebook policies to do that, but every day I see hundreds of posts like that. Now, if you're a newbie and you're trying to think, well, I want to get into real estate, but I don't have any money and I don't have a lender, you may click on that and say, hey, tell me more. And then you're going to get scammed, right? That's one way. Another way is where people will say, I'll partner with you on deals. I got the crew and everything. And you will unsuspectingly bring that deal that took you 3 or 6 months to find, and you'll bring it to someone who's just going to steal the deal from you. And I could just go on and on and on with different scams. So my student Chris, we did a video I posted. You can see it on my Facebook and on my YouTube. He's the student that made $3 million over the last few years. And he said, when I signed up for Lex's coaching, what I learned in hindsight is I paid Lex to make sure I didn't make mistakes. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that, because little things that you would never think of, like a contractor telling you the job's 20 grand and you say, okay, here's 10 grand. And then he disappears on you and your 10 grand's gone. Or he buys the material, puts it in the house, and then 2 days later calls you and says, it looks like someone broke in, they stole all your materials. There's all these kind of scams that you got to watch out for and be aware of. And that's what makes many newbies stay newbies, or even worse, attempt to do a deal, have it fall apart, and then say, oh, this is no good, it doesn't work, right? But the reality is it does work. And look at how many students I have that are multimillionaires. I'm not saying millionaires, I'm saying multimillionaires. They got multiple millions of dollars. So many students. And the strategy is simple. But here's the part that trips people up. I have these 3-day events. For example, I got one coming up this weekend, which is the foreclosures, bank home properties, foreclosure short sales and bank home properties boot camp. And I believe we are sold out on that event. We may have a uh, a preview ticket. I don't know. You can call my office and find out if there's any available. But when I checked yesterday, I believe they said we were sold out. But I know that they do last minute registrations on the Tuesday and the Wednesday and the Thursday. And sometimes someone says I'll be coming in with my wife, and then the spouse doesn't come, or sometimes someone says I'm going to fly in from Minnesota, and then oh the weather was bad, I can't come in, or whatever it might be. So there's often a couple of last minute people that are no shows or let us know that they're not coming. So if you want to be at the event this week and call my office, just go to my website lexlevinrad.com, call the number at the top of the screen, and see if you can get yourself a preview ticket. If you're local to Florida, I'd love to meet you. Come to the event, shake your hand, say hi. If you're not local, if you're out of state and you don't want to fly in, I understand that. We can go ahead and give you a Zoom link. Either way. So going back to the topic, most newbies that come into these boot camps, they think, hey, I paid whatever, let's say $997 for a preview ticket. Right? Our training program is $7,500, our basic core program. And we do offer a 50% discount if someone pays up front. They can pay 5K and get into our basic program. Sometimes what happens is people are like, well, I don't really know. Is this a scam? So we let them do what we call a preview ticket. And a preview ticket is essentially previewing our program. In other words, hey, come spend 3 days with Lex at this boot camp. It's just $997. You're going to have a great time. You're going to learn. At the end of the 3 days, you can leave with some information. If you decide by Sunday, 5 p.m., that this is a good fit for you, you can pay the other 4K and you can be in our program. So a lot of people take us up on that. And I got to tell you, the conversion rate's north of 97%, meaning the vast majority of people, almost everyone who shows up at a 3-day event, is going to sign up for our program. And the reason for that is very simple, because when they come to the event and they see me and they see like, hey, Lex is just like a regular guy. This is not like a big theatrical production with audio and visual and dancing circuses and some of the things I see some of my associates do. It's just a guy in the front of the room with a PowerPoint who's been doing this for 23 years, who's done 4,500 deals with his students. When they meet my students on the breaks, when you're making that cup of coffee in the back of the room, when we have our little 10-minute breaks, and you chat with Chris or with Andy or any of our students that are in the room, and we have a lot of students in the room, not like one or two. We have like 35 students in the room. And when you meet with them and you discuss on the break, you start thinking, wow, like this guy started 3 years ago, now he's got 900 grand. This guy started 4 years ago, now he's worth, $2 million. You start realizing that it's not a scam. You start realizing that it's real. That's why I always encourage people to come to the events. If you can, fly in. You know why? Yes, it's a little bit more expensive. You got to pay for a hotel. You got to pay for an airfare. But you're not going to be able to get the same feeling on a Zoom as you would in person. Being able to sit there and chat with the person to your left or right, who's one of my students, who's made $1 million, $2 million in real estate. And that's what's going to push you over the edge. And I encourage people, I say, listen, real estate is public record. What I mean by that is ask the student, what property did you buy? What was the address? What did you pay for it? You can look that up. And then you can be like, wow, this is real. This really happened. It's not a scam. And that's why 97% of people by Sunday night say, sign me up. All right. But going back to the concept, these many newbies that I find, they come to these 3-day events, just like this Bank Home Properties Boot Camp. They think they're going to learn everything they need to know about buying bank home properties in 3 days. And that's just not possible. You know what, guys? I take all my students on a bus trip on Saturday morning to go look at one or two bank home properties. By the time we come back from the bus, we have lunch, we come back, it's 2 p.m. We got 3 hours left on Saturday. Friday, we got a lot of intro stuff. Sunday, we've got a lot of meats and potatoes stuff. And what I find is that, you know, you're digging surface level. You're going to need to get down to the meat and potatoes. So let's say you understand the concept. I want to buy a house for 50 cents on the dollar. I want to fix it up. I want to rent it out. I want to fix it up and I want to flip it. Whatever. Fix it up and turn it into an Airbnb. Or I want to wholesale it and make a quick 10, 20 grand. Great. But now we've got to drill down deeper. And this is what tricks everyone up. And this, in my opinion, is also the fault of the majority of the real estate training programs out there. They'll charge like a relatively inexpensive price, or in some cases, they charge a lot of money. They charge what my coaching program is to give people very basic level advice that you could pretty much find online. But they don't drill deep, they don't give them the details. So, in other words, okay, so you understand the concept. Now you need to find a house. How are you going to find a house? Where are you going to find a house? How are you going to market to them? What are you going to say? Right? So that a lot of that we cover in our wholesaling bootcamp. Now you found a house, you got to fix it up. How much is it going to cost to fix up the house? Who's going to do the work? What are you going to pay for labor? What are you going to pay materials? What are the going rates for this? So at my fix and flip bootcamp, which is coming up next month in March, I take my students to Home Depot. We go aisle by aisle. I show them this is the laminate floor we use. This is the tile we use. This is the countertop we use. This is how you put it all together. This is what you should be paying a subcontractor. So you need to know that, right? Um, how do I find a deal at 50 cents from the dollar from a bank? Well, that's at the Bank Owned Properties Boot Camp. Great, Lex. Now I bought the property. I fixed it up. I want to rent it up. How do I learn about landlording and buying rentals and being a landlord? Well, we have a boot camp for that called Buying Rentals and Building Wealth Boot Camp, right? So those are our four main boot camps. We do the wholesaling boot camp twice a year because that's a very popular product. We're teaching people how to wholesale flip houses without using any of their own cash or credit. And so we do that twice a year. It's also, we teach people how to source deals and find deals directly from motivated sellers. Then we do the fix and flip boot camp twice a year. Also very popular. We take people through fix and flips. We show them rehab estimates, material, labor, how to put all the numbers together. We have something called a rehab property calculator where we show you, hey, this property that the wholesaler told you it's worth 260 and you can buy it for 180 and it sounded like such a great deal, but this is why you would lose money if you paid that amount. And we run you through the holding costs, the interest, all the calculations, show you how you have to buy it a lot cheaper than you think you do in order to make money. All right. So these all come together. They come in hand in hand. And that's why when we started teaching, I would go out and I would do like my wholesaling boot camp and people would come and then they'd go. And I realized, you know what, I'm not arming them with enough information to actually do something. And that was how we came into this program where we got the four different boot camps 6 times a year. And we encourage our students to come into our entire program. So we say, hey, it's $7,500. You can put 1,500 down, 500 a month, or one shot 5K. You're not sure. You don't know if you want to commit. You're worried this is a scam. No problem. Pay $997. Come to a preview of our boot camp like we have this weekend. Check it out. Spend 3 days with me. Meet my team. Meet my students. And you decide yourself. No hard feelings if you don't want to sign up. Like I said, 97% of people do. But either way, you'll have a great weekend. You'll learn a lot. What you'll learn will be worth 1,000 times more than what you spent to be there for those 3 days. And if you decide to take me up on joining my program, then come to the Bank Home Properties Bootcamp, come to the Fix and Flip Bootcamp, come to the Wholesaling Bootcamp, come to the Rentals Bootcamp. In addition to that, we've got a home study course. We've got a bunch of books. We've got an online training site with over 1,000 hours of video. We've got an entire bird dog training program. We've got so much training material, all of our boot camps recorded, saved, and put all of that together. And guess what? 3 to 6 month learning curve, it'll start making sense. You'll start looking for that first deal. And when you get that first deal, you'll make as much or more than you paid, even if you were my coaching student and you paid a large amount to be in my coaching program. And what I mean by that is that, like, I got a student right now that we just committed to fund a deal on. House is worth a solid 260. They're buying it for about 40 cents on the dollar. So one deal could be 60 grand, 80 grand. One deal could be your annual salary, pretty much. Just one deal. And if you could do a deal every 6 months, well, you could be basically tripling your salary. Right? You make 100 grand a year, you could be making 300 grand a year. And if you're smart, you buy these houses, you fix them up, you rent them out, and you just wait patiently. 15 years, you pay your mortgage extra 10% towards the principal. You'll pay that mortgage off in about 9, 10 years. That's all it is. 10-year financial freedom plan. All right. So, guys, what's working in today's market? That's how we started this podcast episode. So I'll run down through this real quick. Here's what I would be very, very careful of: fix and flips. Why? Prices are coming down. 6 months from now, by the time you're done with your flip and you're trying to sell it, you might get less than you thought for it. Very risky strategy in this environment. I don't recommend it unless you're buying real, real cheap. Okay. What does work? Buying rentals, especially affordable, low price rentals like Section 8 properties. in low price markets where you can pick up a house for 100 grand, 110 grand. That works fabulously. Take that and buy that in addition to um, low price bank home properties. So let's say you find a bank home property you can pick up cheap, or a house from a motivated seller you can pick up cheap, and you fix it up, you rent it out Section 8. You don't have to do a great job renting it out because it's going to be Section 8, probably going to trash it anyway. That's one strategy that works really well, and that's what I'm really encouraging a lot of my students to do, especially in light of the increase in foreclosures and bank home properties. As we see more foreclosures, more short sales, more bank home properties, keep an eye out for these lower priced, affordable homes that you could buy cheap, fix up simply, cheaply, and then rent out, and then go refinance and just do that buy, repair, rental finance. So that works well. It's probably strategy number one I'd recommend right now. Generally speaking, that's the strategy I recommend to most of my students, period, right? It's what made me my first million. It's what made me my second million. It's what made most of my students their first or second $1 million. And it's a viable strategy that works in any market. Second strategy, I would say, is if you're into wholesaling and you're trying to wholesale, what I've found is that if you get a house under contract and you're trying to flip it to someone and you're posting it on Facebook groups, you're posting it on Craigslist, or you're putting it on InvestorLift, InvestorBase, these kind of platforms, a lot of times you run the risk of someone going around you on your deal and you losing the contract and losing the deal. And instead of making 20 grand on a house, you make zero. I think a better strategy, if you've got a really good deal at 50 cents on the dollar, and for whatever reason, you don't want to be a landlord, you don't want to fix and flip it, you don't want to close on it and own it, you just want to make, let's say, 20 grand. A better strategy is just close on it and put it on the MLS. Case in point, the deal I sold last week at 145, I closed at 110. So closed at 110, put it on the MLS, painted it, trashed it out, made maybe 25 grand net, right? If I was wholesaling that, I doubt I would have made more than 25 grand wholesaling, but I would have basically had to put the address out there, email it out, text it out, punch it on a bunch of these sites, and then I run the risk that some guy goes and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, I'll give you 5 grand more than Lex." So eliminate that risk by closing. Once you close, you put a lockbox, you put it on the MLS. No need to put on a deal blast. All right, so that's one big way that I think the market's changed. When you think back to ever since I started in 2003 to today, the market's shifted in a very, very big way. Because when I started out in this business, wholesalers were happy to make 3, 5 grand, maybe 10. Nowadays, wholesalers want to make 60, 80 grand on a deal. They want to whack it so bad that they literally, uh, you know, rip you apart. So that the minute you buy that house, you're screwed. And unfortunately, a lot of newbies fall prey to that, right? They go, "Oh, house is worth 320 ARV. Look at this comp. Look at that comp. Yours for 260." And the newbie thinks they're getting a deal. And then the newbie lands up defaulting because they overpaid. The house is not really worth what the wholesaler told them it was worth. So another strategy um, that I think works very, very well is patience, right? And this is one of those things that I got to tell you guys. I've been doing this, like I said, for 23 years. But prior to that, just after the 87 stock market crash, I was stockbroker and money manager. You learn a thing or two about patience. Like, in other words, if you could step away and you could look at the forest instead of the tree. Let's imagine you're sitting under a tree, right? All you see, in a forest, you're sitting under a tree, you're eating your lunch. You look around you, you see a beautiful scenery, you see other trees. But imagine you could transport yourself out of that. Now you're on a helicopter above the forest and you see, like, oh wow, I didn't realize that this forest was just right next to this beautiful lake with this waterfall and everything else, because all I saw were the trees around me. So what I've learned um, from all these years of investing in real estate and other investments is this: looking at the bigger picture and stepping back and having patience. What I find with students, especially coaching students, is they come into my program, they pay a big amount of money. People pay like 50 grand to do one-on-one coaching with me for a year, right? So it's a big amount of money. It's a big commitment. Some people take money out of their 401k, home equity loans. It's a substantial commitment, but they're all working one-on-one with me. I give them my cell phone. They can contact me, right? And literally what I say to them is, hey, the first house you buy, that first rental property you buy, if you don't make in equity more than what you paid me, I'll do the second and the third deal with you until you've got a return on your money that you're happy with. And then you'll know how to do this for the rest of your life for free. So I believe in the principle: if you don't give a man or a woman a fish, you teach them how to fish. I don't give you a house, I teach you how to find the houses yourself. And that's a skill set that's worth literally hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars per year, potentially to you. It's way more valuable than a college degree. And even if you have an Ivy League education, I'll say it's more valuable than that because I've got students that are brain surgeons that went to Harvard. I've got students that went to Yale Medical and are OBGYNs, and they quit that to do real estate. And the reason was because they were making more money in real estate, right? So the skill set that you can learn in this business is so astronomically high relative to other professions out there. I've got buddies, like someone who does well, like a doctor or whatever, makes 600,000 a year, thinks he's king of the castle. I've got buddies that make 400,000 a week wholesaling, 400 a week. They talk like truck drivers. The amount of money that can be made in this business is absolutely obscene because once you learn that you can buy a house from a motivated seller at 30, 40 cents on the dollar, you learn how to buy two or five or 10. And then you hire people, you do more marketing, and you have people answering the phones, people going on the appointments. And that's how you scale from making 500,000 a year to making 10 million a year. And I've got plenty of friends that make $8, $10 million a year flipping houses every single year. Now compare that to that, proverbial six-figure paycheck that your career counselor in college promised you. The average American's making 70, 80, $100,000 a year. If they're lucky, 50% of Americans make less than 30,000 a year. Think about that for a second. 48%, according to USA Today, 48% of Americans make less than 30,000 a year. You think, how's that possible? How can you even live on that? Well, go look at all the people who work in the fast food industry. What are they making? $15 an hour, that's $30,000 a year. All the people driving Uber, what are they making? $15 an hour. There's a million people doing that. 10 million people working in the fast food industry. So that's 11 million people right there. And go, busboys, waiters, servers, etc. Right? So basically, a lot of people that don't make money. But if you're not in that ballpark, and if you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance you're not. You probably make 80,000 or 100,000, maybe, right? Or more. And maybe if you're lucky, you make 150 or 200. But either way, we all have the same problem. We all have the same dilemma. How do I break out of this situation? I don't want to work on this job forever till I die. How do I create financial freedom? How do I retire? How do I create wealth? And the answer to that is by learning all of the facets of investing in real estate, what I like to call a complete real estate investor, right? Not somebody who knows how to wholesale, or someone who knows lease options, or someone who knows subject to. And by the way, be careful with subject to right now because the regulators are swarming like flies all over that, right? Um, a complete real estate investor knows every single aspect. They know how to buy a house, keep it as a rental, fix and flip it, wholesale it, sell it on a lease option. They've got multiple exit strategies. And that's what I teach my students how to do. And that's why I say, if you can teach a man or woman how to fish, it's way better than giving them a fish. If I can teach you how to find unlimited houses at 50 cents on the dollar, that's way better for you than giving you a house. And when I started out my coaching and people paid me a big amount of money, I said, okay, well, all I got to do is find this person a house. They got the equity. They're going to be happy. I did that with one lady. I got her two houses. She made 100 grand. She's a happy camper. And then I said to myself, you know what? You're doing her a disservice because the minute you move on and start working with another student, how's this lady going to find another house? And the answer is she isn't. And she didn't. And I realized I got to change my strategy. It's not about them paying me and me just giving them a house. It's about me teaching them how to do this themselves. And that's the difference between my training program and all the other training programs that are out there. All right. So, guys, that's what's working in today's market. Be careful out there. Be careful of fix and flips. Prices are coming down. Foreclosures are increasing. I just told you 40,000 properties taken back in the last 30 days by banks. I anticipate more weakness, more short sales, more foreclosures, more pre-foreclosures, more bank-owned properties, which is, once again, why you want to be at the bank-owned properties boot camp this weekend. And some people go, well, I got something going on. When's the next one? How about this? February 2027, 1 year from now. 1 year from now is the next one. All right. So basically, in a nutshell, if you want to learn how to do this, then make sure you're there. And if you're local, it's a no-brainer. Call my office and see if you can grab one of those tickets. And if you're not local and you want to do the Zoom, then register for that. And I'll see you at the boot camp. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you do want to come to the event this weekend, call my office. Just go to lexlevinrad.com, call the phone number in the top right. See if there are any preview tickets available, if there are any cancellations last minute for you to grab a ticket. Otherwise, make it a great day, and I will see you on the next podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Investing in Real Estate Show. Your next step towards financial freedom is to visit LexLevinrad.com. If you want to work with Lex as your real estate coach, make sure you book a free strategy session on LexLevinrad.com. We'll see you on the next episode with more ways to help you achieve financial freedom through investing in real estate.